let's introduce you to some leaders and who are the people who hopefully will start taking this action and not sit around watching the documentary. Let me introduce Maria Machancoses, Chief Executive of Midlands Connect. Maria, are you with us? Yes, you are. Do come and join us. Andrew Summers, Strategic Director, Transport East. Ben Plowden, Associate at PA Consulting. Ben, thank you for joining us. Glenn's here already. Sue Percy, Chief Executive of the Chartered Institute of Highways and Transportation. And Rupert Clubb, Lead Officer at the Transport for the South East. Rupert, welcome. Do join us. Have we got enough microphones? Probably not. Who's got a microphone? Can you pass the microphone to maybe Maria? Because Maria, can you start us off from the, I suppose, the perception that you have at Midlands Connect. Take us through the wicked challenges that you face when it comes to moving people. I suppose draw on some of the issues that Glenn has raised there, but talk us through some of the wicked challenges. Keep it short.
Okay. Hi, everyone. From a Midlands perspective, let's think about what STBs do on our region itself. If you know the Midlands, we got substantial levels of rural areas. We also got thriving sort of combined authority, city region as they called, like the West Midlands, the East Midlands, pockets between Leicester, Nottingham, Derby. There's a huge appetite to invest in active travel, local transport, to your points, to encourage behaviour change, more active, healthier benefits in the region. So there's a lot of appetite for combined measures, the introduction of combined measures of transport in those urban areas. Yet, we have to deal with rural, and yet we have to deal with the new generation, the new way of thinking. I think that's been the biggest challenge for us. Continue to plan for transport in the traditional way of, that's where growth is, this is how we're going to regenerate, where investment is going to go in terms of regeneration, the living, regenerating our high streets. There's a lot of economic activities going on across the region, and we want to link it. So east-west connectivity remains important for us. But the biggest challenge we've got at hand is to say, how do you actually integrate our approach to planning for transport in an era where people's behaviors have changed substantially? They still want to travel, let's not forget that. It's how you make those informed decisions, give them the options to have those informed decisions better. And I tell you what, the new generation is not just relying on apps for train timetables anymore. They are thinking about, Uber. They are thinking about what's the cheapest way I can get there. I need to actually get, so it's this whole phenomenon of challenges that we are experiencing.
Loads of stuff to get stuck back into there. Rupert, what about yourself? How is it? Is it any different down in the southeast?
It's sunnier. I think part of the behavioural challenges I think was set out quite nicely. And if you think about how do you bring about that change? How do you incentivise people, for example, to get out of their car and use public transport? Now we all know that the cost is of getting a train or a bus is disproportionate to the cost of driving. You could buy a ticket from the south coast up to here, 300 quid. You could drive up for, I'm going to say with fuel prices today, but for £100 you could probably get in the car and drive up. So, we need to think about how do we nudge people, how do we incentivise people? And I think, we touched upon it on the earlier panel, there is a broader conversation about transport taxation. How do we manage demand? How do we enable people to use different modes of transport? And I think, building on Maria's point, STBs bring about an integration. We talk about RISs and control periods and BSIPs and all of that. Actually, what we should be talking about is a transport investment strategy.
Okay.
Properly multimodal, integrated transport investment strategy, and move away from what has historically been a fairly silo-based approach.
And that covers the issues around social issues, economic issues, the bigger picture. What about what's happening in the east? It's obviously not as sunny as it is in the south, Andrew, but what's happening in the east?
Yeah, in one word, we're focused on outcomes. So in the east, we talked earlier on about STBs coming together. Is it the right time for regions? Well, in terms of the tide coming in or out, our local leaders sucked the tide back in. We knew we had outcomes we had to crack, at a partnership level. So whether or not people wanted to create regional bodies or not, our regions decided to do it anyway, because we know there's outcomes we have to tackle here as subnational transport bodies, partners working together. Those problems, those challenges in the East are multiple outcomes across environment, society and economy. 500,000 new homes to be delivered in the East over the next 20 years. That's a huge challenge. We have 1/3 of our people living in rural areas, 1 in 5 living on the coast. We don't have one dominant metropolitan urban area, we have 75 towns and cities, and it's the connectivity within and between those cities and towns and connecting to the rest of the UK that is fundamental to our economy. But going back to Glenn's presentation earlier on, our region has the highest proportion of transport emissions as a total of total emissions. 42% of our emissions in the East are from transport, and that is a huge challenge for us, considering the amount of growth and the car dependence that we have, which is why the STBs come together. Transport East was formed. Our local leaders recognised we can't do this on our own. Let's work together on this. Hence the formation of Transport East, and our strategy, which went out for public consultation earlier this year, we're submitting to the Secretary of State later this year, sets out our roadmap to tackling that.
Okay, thanks very much. Sue, from an overarching kind of perspective that you see from the Chartered Institute of Highways and Transportation, what for you are the moving people wicked challenges that need solving?
As you gathered, we're not an STB, we are a professional body. And I was just reflecting on Glenn's presentation. And when I started my career, I was in academia, and I was lecturing on environmental policy. And I was reflecting, well, where have we got to over the last 25 years? And the answer is probably not that far. And so this urgency issue is absolutely fundamental. And it becomes overwhelming if you look at it in some light. So I think that the thing that we are trying to do is really start to break that down, so actually we all feel we can do something to actually get to that sort of net zero position. I would also sort of say the issue that around sort of the technocentric approach, which this sector tends to focus on, is fine. It's good, but it has to be balanced by a people-centred approach and a more eco-centred approach. Glenn was talking about his 3 points axes, but again, the eco, people and technological approach has to come together. Otherwise, it will be unbalanced and you won't get the movement coming through. And the other point, being a professional body, and it's been mentioned previously, but not in this session, is we need to make sure we've got the capacity and the capability to do this, because it's a huge challenge, and the skills that we have at the moment aren't necessarily going to deliver what will be needed.
Thank you, Sue. Ben, how do you fit into this panel here? How do you see the wicked challenges of moving people?
So I think this is a challenge in 3 parts, and you've heard some of this from other speakers. First of all, we have to move at pace and at scale, if you heard from both Rachel and Glenn and the other panellists. So we've really got to get on with this as quickly as we possibly can, because a tonne of carbon not emitted today is worth a lot more than a tonne of carbon not emitted in 5 or 10 years' time in terms of climate change in particular. The second part of the challenge is a very complex delivery challenge across multiple geographies, different levels of decision making, right across all the different transport modes, across infrastructure, operations, technology, communication. So we really need to think very carefully about how we map out and then integrate the response to that delivery challenge across all those different domains. And the third point, I think, as Glenn has said, is this has to be, at least in part, about behaviour change. Technology is crucial, but as he said, behaviour change is central to this. Whether we travel, how we travel, when we travel, how far we travel, are all questions we have to address very urgently. And thinking about that challenge alongside the technology challenge, I think is going to be crucial to this. And I think the STBs have a very important role across all 3 of those domains in terms of the regional coordination and insight into these challenges, and making sure that all the delivery partners and all the planning partners are lined up to meet those 3 aspects of that wicked challenge.
Because Glenn, for you, I presume that you would argue that if the STBs do accelerate this change, to enable things to decarbonise quicker, more effectively, then it will really start tackling some of those accessibility, affordability, social issues.
Yeah, I mean, this isn't all about bad news for all of us out there living our lives. It's about living our lives differently. It's about maintaining access, which we need for economic prosperity and social well-being, but we don't need to drive these big lumps of metal for every time we need access to something. Transport Scotland's talking about a 20% reduction, so I completely agree. I drive a car, but if I got told, guess what, to save the planet, you can have 80% of what you had pre-COVID and carry on with your life, I'd be like a pig in muck. But, it's not telling people car use is no longer going to happen in the UK. And as Gillian Annabel would say if she's here, there are no win-win situations left now. If you're in an emergency, if the house is on fire, you're not picking out which set of clothes to wear to dress up to go out of the house. This is about painful, difficult decisions, but ones which can be enabling as well.
So Maria, how do you as an STB influence that painful decision, that difficult decision, that potentially good decision?
I think part of it is the evidence-led, as we were saying earlier. I mean, there's a lot of already perceptions of actually, car is not good, we shouldn't be traveling by car. I think, we need to not patronize actually the knowledge of people out there. It's actually giving them, as I said, the information where they can make the right decisions. So the way we're doing, for instance, at the moment is we're doing some work on how you will get from Coventry to Leicester. At the moment, there's not direct train services between those two major economic hubs in the Midlands. Actually, 98% of trips are being made by car. When you tell them how much it's taking them to drive and how much it's costing that in petrol, and then how much is the equivalent that in the railway and what it does to the environment, it's this kind of informed decisions that people will say, you know what, I'm going to just give it a try.
Let's build on that. There's a time clock in front of me which is really showing us heading towards lunch. So I really want to get in some of the questions that are flooding in on Slido here. Rupert, perhaps build on what Maria's just said there and answer the question from Swati Mittal. We all talk about behaviour change, but how do we influence this change against people's wishes in a democratic world? So how do the STBs actually carry out that influence?
So I mean, it all comes down to, I think, setting out that vision, that ambition for your place. Mm-hmm. And we've got to think about, well, what is it that people want out of life? It's the roof over the head, access to jobs, healthcare, education, green spaces. Certainly, that's come out about COVID has emphasised that. So I think really understanding the place and the people that are in there. I mean, Naomi picked that up at the first panel, and starting to recognise that, yes, of course we want economic growth, but it cannot be growth at any cost. Yeah. And that's quite important. It's about really clever growth, in drawing in inward investment. I mean, in the South East, we are, I like to think, my colleagues might disagree, but we're the international gateway to the UK. Moving goods and services into this country and out. A huge amount comes through the southeast. And so understanding the place, understanding those kinds of needs, and then you can start to think about, well, if that's ticking people's boxes, how do you incentivise, how do you nudge, and how do you bring about that behaviour change? And if you look at things like, to slightly go off piste a little bit, road safety, 98% of accidents are caused by behaviour. Not because there aren't engineering measures or signs, it's a behaviour. And it takes time, sometimes a generation of time to bring about that shift.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Andrew, build on that, but also answer this question here, which is, it's gone again. People can actually move themselves, my screen has shifted, people can actually move themselves through active travel, which can be part of the longer public transport journey. How do STBs really prioritise that? Is that possible in your region? And then maybe Sue can have a go at that question as well. Andrew.
Yeah, and I'll answer the active travel question, then the one that Rupert answered as well. So in terms of active travel in the East, it looks very different to a London or a Manchester or anywhere else. The situation is completely different. However, we're only 140 miles away from Holland, where in a very similar type of environment, they have cracked it. What we did, and this is one of the values of STBs, we worked jointly with Sustrans last year. We produced a joint report with them that set out an approach for areas like the East, where you have examples such as market town mini Hollands, for example, taking some of the inspiration from places like London, but translating those principles to some of our other places. Looking at the opportunities for active travel in places like the East, for example, along our coast, we have a huge tourism industry. Active travel, can be a sort of a bit of a gateway drug when they come on holiday, and then use active travel when they go back home. Our towns and cities, however, Norwich, a prime example of where investment, and not investment solely in active travel, but investment in integrated transport through the Transforming Cities Fund, has allowed active travel to be integrated into a wider set of transport delivery plans, which is important in terms of public acceptability. So there is a way to deliver active travel. I know the gear change document prefers urban areas, but what we're saying is there is a way in rural areas to also deliver active travel. On the other point about inward investment and the importance of people there, there's, I guess, one case study in the East that has gone very well and an opportunity in the future. So in the UK Innovation Corridor, I guess partners in the East bet about 20, 30 years ago on a bioscience cluster. Put in the infrastructure there, put in the incubation, and importantly in places like Cambridge, put in the sustainable transport measures where people that are going to work there will demand. And what we've seen over the last 20 years is that economic cluster flourish. For example, AstraZeneca, through the last pandemic, fundamental to the UK's response there. Now, if we look in the East in the future about places like that, the obvious example is the energy coast. And we have places along our coast, and it's not just in the east of England, it's along the Midlands and the north coast as well. We have offshore renewable energy sectors. That is the way to power the UK in the future. Now, we have towns there that need levelling up, and we also need to develop employment clusters there as well. So can we use this transport strategy that we've got as an opportunity to not only achieve those economic goals, but also improve our approach to decarbonisation as well, because it's those sectors that are going to help us get out of that, the win-win that we're looking for.
Thanks, Andrew. Good point. Sue, can you tackle this issue around the role of active travel, but also as a question from Chris Todd, it's fine hearing from the panel about moving people and climate crisis, yet how will STBs achieve change if they're still promoting road building?
Okay, on active travel, you can incentivise, you can do things in Leicester, for example. They've developed an app and you actually get points and rewards for actually just changing 2 of 10 journeys and doing it actively. And the carbon saving, they also captured that. It was about 100,000 tonnes of carbon just reduced from that single incentive only. So there are ways you can do it, and there are ways that you can actually really scale it up. But with active travel, the one thing that I think we always have to remember is that active travel tends to be focused on people who are able-bodied, don't have disabilities. So whatever we do, it has to be inclusive, because we're going to actually have a lot more social exclusion if we don't embrace whatever active travel that we're trying to put in place, that it's not just everyone. Everyone can't just get on a bike. Everyone can't just walk, and how we really build that in. But the other point really goes back. Transport is not an end in itself. It's about moving people and goods around. And so the way to, I think, to really make a shift change is the much better integration with spatial planning. If you start to pull those two things together, you can actually accelerate this really substantially. So there's a lot of work going on around the 15-minute city. That can very much be based within the UK. And I think STBs have a real leadership role in actually bringing those two aspects together, transport with planning. And certainly, we've just done a survey with a lot of transport planners, and 80%, we had over 700 people respond, 80% think the planning transport integration is one of the key solutions. 90% feel there are real problems at this point in delivering sustainable solutions through that process. So we've got a huge opportunity if we can get that right. So it's not just about active travel, it's about how we put in place-based solutions for wherever you happen to live, which actually works for you and actually integrates into a more sort of 15-minute city sort of approach.
Thanks. So question, Andrew and Glenn maybe take this one. From Richard, can STBs bridge the complexity gap between national and local networks to produce a viable alternative to driving? Andrew.
Yeah, so one of the things that we're doing as a subnational transport body is developing an agent-based model for the region. Now, what this really means is a people-based movement model, and part of the value of STBs is to be able to look across regions, to not look traditionally at some of the ways of measuring the benefits of transport schemes, i.e. vehicle movement, but looking at people movement instead. And by doing that, we can look at end-to-end journeys that people want to make, and what the benefit of the model also includes are elements such as sort of social inclusion, the economic goals of people. Do they need to make the trip in the first place? So one of the values I think that STBs can really provide here is that analysis across regions to look at people movement and not necessarily vehicle movement, which will be a shift change in the debate and how we might prioritise investment in the future.
Maria, you want to come in on this?
Yeah, I just wanted to add, because I gather, this is our first STB conference, and I know that some of you might not be that familiar with STBs. I think one of the things that we need to all really sort of understand is that STBs are not here to duplicate, absolutely not duplicate the work of our national bodies like National Highways or Network Rail, and indeed the huge efforts that local authorities are doing in their own right. And we are actually waiting the LTP guidance on future local transport plans, which actually we all really looking forward to it. We're not here to duplicate and yet another vision and yet another plan for transport, but we will not add value unless we really concentrate on bringing regions together. That's a strategic debate around place and bringing towns and cities and understanding sectors. That's what STBs have done, and that's what your strategic transport plans are doing, is that vision of how you bring a much bigger region together and with each other. So again, STBs are trying really hard to work with other STBs in the space of new technology, new innovation that encourages those sustainable solutions that you have just referred to. So just making it very clear, we're not here to to step into the absolutely tremendous work that local transport authorities are doing at local level. This is the added value, is a strategic connectivity, a strategic planning at its best, and battling the new challenges of transport. Just
okay.
To add to the debate.
The screen's going red in front of me, which means we're running out of time rapidly. So, Ben, question here. Jonathan Mott has said, with major housing growth targets, shouldn't we be looking at integrated spatial, economic and transport strategies to deliver good growth as a whole?
Well, absolutely. And Sue's made the point about the critical importance of lining up your transport planning with your spatial planning. It's very important not to extrapolate what London's been able to do, because London isn't like many other places in the country in terms of the institutional setup or the resources or the governance. However, the transport strategy for London is a requirement in the statute and needs to be aligned with the land use plan for London, which is the London plan. And tying together your transport infrastructure investments and your operations with your development opportunities in terms of brownfield sites, where your housing is going to go, where new retail is going to happen, is absolutely fundamental to Sue's point, to making sure that you can maximise access to goods, services and opportunities for your community whilst reducing the need to travel, and certainly travel long distances with fossil fuel-based transport. So I think if we can line up the new LTPs with the development plans right across the country, that will give us a real opportunity to make life more accessible, but also not necessarily having huge amounts of additional movement as a result.
Very quickly, Rupert.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about the South East. There's nearly 50 local planning authorities, and there is this complete disconnect between transport planning and land use planning. We would like to see that brought closer together. But the way in which we're getting over that lump at the moment is to bring our local planning authorities on, help us understand where their development's proposed, playing that into our modelling, and making sure that things like employment space is close to where you're putting housing, rather than having employment over there and housing over there, and therefore forcing the need to travel. That's a fundamental component of our modelling approach.
Final point, just a challenge back to Glenn from Anonymous. Should we have more focus on other factors other than emissions, improving connectivity, levelling up, better public health, probably more relevant to a lot of people?
I think that's a very good point in terms of the messaging, because the decarbonisation, inequality in the end won't matter if we're all on a dead planet. But the route to that is absolutely about recognising that happier, healthier people are more economically productive, and then that creates the resources to support further development and enrichment of communities around all the STBs and their territories. So yes, it's messaging. Sadly, the transport sector, a bit like Sue said, not much has changed in the last X years. I bet someone today will say communication is really important. There we are, I've just said it. But we're not very good at it, are we, in this sector? So we better sort that one out pretty damn quick.
Well, I'm going to give you, Sue, it has gone red now, so I'm going to Sue the last word. How do STBs help to overcome, as Glenn puts it, the death march of business as usual?
Okay, that's quite a challenge. And the last comments, there's two things for me. STBs can really support the evidence base, and they do that really well, looking at what they've produced, and that's so important because they do need to work with the local authorities, but local authorities' resources have been really hollowed out over a number of years. And so actually STB's role in that, providing the evidence base, looking at things at a strategic regional level. We used to have regional planning, actually, a while ago, but we hadn't, and then it's coming back. So I think their role there is absolutely critical. Equally, providing solutions-based sort of approaches for that area. And I know the Southeast, for example, has actually divided their area into 4 different sort of typologies. And actually, whether it's rural, urban, economic hubs, remote, rural, and then looked at the solutions for those particular areas. So I think there's a huge amount. And also, I would really encourage STPs through the leadership, through their politicians, through the people working there, to be brave. This is a time to actually step out of our comfort zones and push forward. And so it's going to take, some courage to do so. But many of us will be behind you, so please do that.
Good note to finish on. Thank you very much. Sorry to rush you on that one. There's a lot of really interesting and rich content in there, I think. Thanks for getting through it so quickly and for being hurried up by me as I did so. So, round of applause to our panellists. Thank you very much.